the younger people. What was the what was the question again? I'm sorry.
So what have you been doing either individually or collectively as a part of this movement?
Individually, I've just been out at Ferguson Police Department protesting with the people out there. I've been to Canfield, been with the family. As far as organization, I've been canvassing, bringing people in for Ferguson October. Been a bit of a part of Ferguson October, but not in general, since I had to go out of town. But that's been pretty much my involvement.
Anybody else?
My name is June Glover. I am a minister, associate minister at Liberation Christian Church. I am a lesbian. Individually, I have, and along with other ministers at my church, have been given pastoral care and praying for the people out in Canfield and being on site to be available for pastoral care. I personally marched in the Mother's March, and just really generally praying for everyone that's out there and for the whole situation. But those were some of the things that I did personally. Thank you.
My name is Steve Holsworth. I'm not with any organization. Personally, I started going out on August 10th to Ferguson to protest, and that was the first day was obviously before the infamous riots that maybe weren't riots, but before even that hit the media, this was the first press conference. So I've probably been out to Ferguson, to Canfield and the police department, and multiple times every week since then for the last 75 days. Some of the projects I worked on was the protest at Governor Nixon's appearance at Jeff Gorda's fundraiser down in Hot Springs, House Springs. It was pretty hot there for us. I also was part of the group that did the protest at the Stenger fundraiser that Claire McCaskill was at, which was during Ferguson October. Participated in a number of marches, both in Clayton and in Ferguson and in Shaw. And I most recently was part of the Pumpkin Fest Smash earlier this week, where we tried to smash white privilege, but unfortunately the police saved white privilege in Clayton. And then today I was part of the funeral procession that went to each of the sites of the killing of a black man by police in the last 75 days here in the St. Louis area. And I have to say that was probably one of the most, even though I've been doing this for 75 days, 74 days, I wasn't there. 74 days now, that to see how close, as we drove from place to place to place, and felt a connection that this is not an issue of one place. This is an issue of all of us here in this region, and the places where we stopped at where the police commission, the county police commission decided they'd rather cancel their meeting than see us was really powerful earlier today, and then to go to each of those sites where there are memorials sitting there, and how quickly you can drive from one to the other, how connected it all is, and then to end up downtown at the Department of Justice, who's supposedly investigating and trying to make this all better, but what have they really done? Was a powerful experience. So that was the latest one today.
Anybody else? Yes, in the back there.
My name is Will Bird. I go by Ella. I use she, her pronouns. And in addition to just going out to several protests and town halls, I co-organized a news discussion for Edwardsville middle and high school kids. I don't know if you heard that the superintendent there decided that the teachers are not going to discuss, and they're, they might end up doing that later, but that was the announcement, that they weren't going to discuss the Ferguson issue with kids there. So
I'm Angie. I'm a part of Parent House Catholic Worker on the North Side, and also the Catholic Worker Anti-Racist Collective, who was created after Mike Brown was killed. We were tasked by leadership of the movement to talk to other white folks and talk about white privilege and kind of talk about what we knew and move people a little further along. And so that's part of what we've been doing. We've been in Ferguson a handful of times. We weren't the leadership of, but we participated in the symphony action, which was really a lot of fun. And also participated in one of the the most recent Food Spark event. And yeah, that's what we do.
I'm Rhonda Wren. I'm also a member of Liberation Christian Church, and I work with some other religious organizations such as Metropolitan Communities United and PICO. One of the things we've done a lot of the marches and been out there supporting, but another one of the things we've done is also with voter registration in the Ferguson area. So going around getting voters registered before the deadline, and now calling, making sure that those are registered to vote, or if they need a ride to the polls or don't know where their polling places are.
Thank you.
Sorry. Anybody else want to tell us what they've been up to with the movement?
I'm Gabby Kingston. Yes, my heart was drawn out of my little house in Maplewood to go join the African Americans in their struggles when I saw it 8 days after, on the news about 8 days after Michael Brown died. And I went up there and had fantastic, positive experiences, and then I came home and watched it on the news and it was so negative. I was like, this is something seriously so wrong. Anyway, I'm late to waking up in life, so, but I'm fresh in the fight. And I'm really passionate about helping all the minorities. But I'm on it, and I'm not going away either. I'm with Don't Shoot Coalition. And
Anyone else? Please. Oh. Let's have that call.
I'm Chloe. I took part in nonviolence training and was a peacemaker at the marches and also for this meeting on Monday. One of the real exciting things I did is go to a women's caucus on the Sunday of that big weekend, and there were a couple of hundred women there from all over the country, and it's one of the most inspiring events I've been to in a long time. Lots of women from all over the country organizing in labor, organizing in anti-racist work, organizing in peace and justice work, organizing in immigration rights. It was just an astonishing experience to be among all those women. They expected about 50 and had 200 show up. It was just an amazing event.
So I'm Melissa. I am clergy. I'm a part of Central Reform Congregation. I'm also partners with KB. I'm serving in Belleville, Illinois until November 30th. And I got a text the night that Michael Brown was killed, wherever you need to go to Ferguson. And it was Saturday night, and so I had to do services Sunday. And I went to services, and in the process of the services, we found out what was going on, and so we went to the first action, which was Clergy Coalition, that Sunday. And then we sat down in the street. We decided to sit down. Everybody sat down, so we just sat down. Pretty much, I've marched and prayed and sang and drummed and did so much. Pretty much the focus of, I think, our attention now is the young people. In the evening, we were tear gassed several nights in a row, rubber bulleted. So I think the focus for me has really shifted to being a clergy presence in the evening after dark, because that's when a lot of the shady stuff happens. And so we've both been on the front lines trying to negotiate with the police. Sometimes, most of the time that doesn't work actually, but just trying to bear witness and trying to assist the young people. We've brought masks and goggles and milk, helping them and doing whatever they tell us to do to help them in their struggle, and particularly after dark, because that's when a lot of the civil rights violations happen. And so,
right, so we're gonna shift the conversation a little bit here. And I'm just gonna quickly introduce Ashton and Ashley. And thank you both for being here. All right, so Ashton, his preferred gender pronouns are he and him. He's organizer for Socialist Alternative and a long-term LGBTQ activist. And Ashley, her preferred pronouns are her and she, co-founder of Millennial Activists United, MAU. Sure. And just because I didn't do it earlier, I'm KB, and my preferred gender pronouns are they, them, or he, him. You got the floor?
Do you want me to go? I think I'm gonna go
Oh,
first.
you're,
I think I'm.
here's Ed. I didn't know I was supposed to introduce you.
No, you're fine.
Okay,
You're
good.
totally good. You're good. So I'm not gonna, I'm gonna start this in the sense that my name is Ed Reggie. For many of you know me as equivalent to the Show Me Marriage buses. So my husband and I in 2009, when Iowa became one of the first legal states in the Midwest to legalize same-sex marriages, we started this campaign of just taking buses of people there, same-sex couples. And these were couples. I'm sort of starting in this because it's kind of what I wear, the badge I wear a lot when I'm seen around town. And we did it because people really, what we found is that the marriage buses were predominantly women, were lesbians, and predominantly women of color, lesbians of color. So what very quickly what I was witnessing was that the media, the message we see on TV is two gay men, typically nationally from coast to coast. When it lost in California Prop 8 and even in the East Coast in Boston, we typically always saw, and I always just say like the more bare of men, the more they were on TV. And maybe that because that was the image that they wanted to incite people. I don't know, but what we found of our bus doing it, the marriage buses, what I found is that women of color were desperate to get protection. Some kind of, they didn't have the money to go to lawyers. And these would be the same couples that would go to City Hall and plop down $35, $40 to get married. They didn't really have anything, grandiose. They just wanted the protection. So that's what I want to say that because that's what the sleeve and the kind of what I wear in Show Me No Hate. But, I'm going to be the first to say that marriage equality, even though we've made great strides, doesn't really keep people in their jobs and doesn't keep people in their houses when there's discrimination. And so one of the things that we have lost sight of, I feel, in the LGBTQ alphabet soup movement is that we've lost a little sight of true equality and justice. And so I come to this table very, I'm going to wrap this up in that, we have to see where we, LGBTQ and AIP, S, all the letters of the alphabet, I don't want to leave them out, but we have to come to the table and realize that we must look at Ferguson and we must realize there are plenty of, in this room, although there's not a tremendous amount of LGBTQ of color, and that is a challenge to reach those people. In fact, many of my couples of these buses, they can't come out. They can't afford to really come here. They're closeted with their families, their churches. We still live in this sort of duality. And so, so I'm here because what's happening in Ferguson is really, it's equal to what we should be fighting for. So, and I'm proud to say when I was asked, to kind of help out, kind of get the word out, to do my part and get the word out. So I'm going to stop there and hand it over to the rest of the folks. Thank you.
Hey folks, thank you so much for coming out. So Ed is really humble, I must say. He did an amazing thing during the the big demonstration during Ferguson weekend. He actually combined National Coming Out Day with the massive protest, and I think that was really amazing and really brave of him. So I came out about 4 years ago, like fully, and when I was younger, I was like questioning my sexuality, and instantly I felt like my identity was contested, right? Like my mother threatened to kick me out the house. I knew when to disown me, but eventually my mom reconciled and everything like that. But that's the way it is for most of us, right? Our identity is contested, our sexuality is contested. And it's interesting that like, you know, coming out is not just like an identity, it's also a political commitment. And it's been that way since the birth of the gay rights movement. And I would say that like to kind of go off of what Ed was saying, like you know, despite the visibility of the LGBTQ movement, despite the inclusion of the word T for trans, right? And despite like 32 states, you know, like having same-sex couple, like being able to have the freedom to marry, we haven't seen those material gains, right? And you know, we've seen a worsening of racial violence. Women's wages have, the wage gap has actually increased. Overall health for people has decreased. And what kind of society are we living in? I mean, we're living under a system of neoliberal capitalism, which started started between 1973 and 1975 during that economic crisis. And what we've seen is massive privatization, cuts of the public sector, cuts of programs that protect working people and poor people. And the familiar picture that has been predominant is that basically cut services that might help poor people while ramping up law enforcement, right? We shut down public housing, but then we make it a crime to be homeless, right? And especially during the economic crisis that started in 2007, 2008, we've seen greater wealth, but a greater consolidation of that wealth. 95% of the wealth from the first 2 to 3 years of this crisis has been concentrated not just in the 1%, but the 0.001%, right? Despite record profitability for the 1%, the job growth that we've seen have been non-union jobs, have been low-wage jobs. Most of those jobs pay between $7 and $13 an hour, and most of those jobs, those minimum wage jobs, are occupied by people of color, women, and the LGBTQ community. And that becomes particularly harsh in a state like Missouri. You know, in a state with 6 million people, we have 1 million people that live in deep poverty. In St. Louis, the poverty rate is 30%. And to kind of tag on what Ed said as well, and you know, despite the mainstream framing of the LGBTQ community as white, homosexual, and rich, the vast majority of the LGBTQ community is working class, are immigrants, are working poor, and involved in criminalized, we call criminalized labor, right? Basically the 99% that Occupy basically talked about, right? And the way that the class division plays out in the LGBTQ community is basically in what's addressed, which we could say is the lack of action by moderate LGBTQ groups around Mike Brown. And this blindness is especially devastating for the trans community of color, who's among the most marginalized and oppressed in our society. Transgender people who are able to get a job, right? Working precarious, low-wage jobs in service industries, jobs where they're not visible to corporate clients, or in criminalized sectors of the economy like sex and drug trades. This situation is made even worse, again, in a state like Missouri, where you can be fired and denied housing because of your identity. For same-sex couples, they're significantly more likely to be poor and receive public funding for that. Receive public funding for those that are considered poor and low income. I would say that like mainstream LGBTQ groups have largely focused on campaigns that ultimately do not challenge the fundamental causes of LGBTQ oppression, often failing to meet the majority of the LGBTQ, basic conditions of economic exploitation and oppression. And I would argue that they moderate their demands to fit within the traditional social structure, and what is acceptable to the Democratic Party and the party's corporate backers. You know, we've also seen an increased mass incarceration. We've seen economic and political disenfranchisement, police brutality, and that's why I would argue that basically Ferguson is a queer fight as well, right? And I think the reason is because we as queers, We live in an intersection, a lot of us live in the intersection of various marginalized identities and experience disproportionately high rates of poverty, unemployment, and imprisonment. For example, trans people across the U.S. experience 3 times as much police violence as non-transgendered people. We all know this, like, right, with a prison population of approximately 7 million, right? 7 million. The United States incarcerates more people than any other nation in the world. And people of color in the trans community are disproportionately more likely to come in contact with the criminal justice system. We've seen a growth in deportation of immigrants. We've seen the growth in detention facilities. And in fact, they've grown fourfold since the 1990s. If you're looking at all this and put all this perspective, right? We're told that inner city violence is basically the greatest source of violence that we face in our community. And I would argue that in fact it's the correction officers and etc. that are the main source of violence for working people in the United States. Nearly 60% of transgendered adults have been in prison or jail for any reason, compared to 2.7% of all adults. 10.2% of all adults. Let me step back. Sorry about that. So an estimated 4 to 8% of the LGBT community, sorry, my bad. I'm a little nervous. But we can argue that this mass incarceration is more about confinement, cheap labor, and psychological terror, right? And so it's also about the power and control over society. It's a way of corralling that mass anger that is directed towards the system, right? By people that basically have no future in the system. But obviously, what like most of us do agree, police aren't here to serve to basically make us safe, right? I mean, we've pretty much shown that that's not the case. But it's actually, I would argue, to protect the property and the prestige of the ruling class. We know this because not one CEO has been arrested for the crimes on Wall Street that were the cause of the economic crisis in which we're all facing. And we could also state this, right? Under President Obama, we've seen more detentions and more deportations of immigrants, right? And evidence shows that like most of these people that have been deported, they're not for like, you know, huge crimes like murder or anything like that, right? It's because of like little things like traffic violations, right? We can also make the point that more people are going to be deported between now and November because Obama has basically turned his back on the immigrant community, you know, and it's just a fucking shame, right? You know, for us in the LGBTQ community, there's a large population that are of this community. Nearly 904,000 are of that community in the United States. There's 32,300 binational same-sex couples, 11,700 same-sex couples where one member is not an American citizen. And then there's an estimated 267,000 LGBTQ individuals that are in the U.S. without legal authorization, right? So I would say that there's some really great things that have been happening, right? We've been protesting since August 9th, which is an amazing feat. And I would say that what's also amazing is what's come out recently. I think I'm not endorsing him, but I'm saying that like, you know, Zaki Barudi's campaign for St. Louis County Executive is a great first step. You know, it's an independent working class campaign. For example, not just campaigning on you know, the indictment of Darren Wilson, but for things like $15 an hour minimum wage, right? You know, for me, like social alternative, our member Sharma Sawant, she was basically the first openly socialist that was elected to a major seat in years, and she was able to institute $15 an hour minimum wage, which basically benefited 100,000 workers, right? And these are sort of the campaigns that should be coming out of this movement. I would argue that anyone that runs should be independent of the two parties of business and represent all of our interests, right? And I would say that if one wants to grasp the need for a new system and a new society, we just need to look at the way that people of color and our community, all of our community, is being treated in this system. And I would argue also that we will not find sexual liberation under capitalism. And we must join the call of Ferguson that the whole system is guilty as hell. We have to recall the history of events like the Revolutionary People's Constitution of 1970, where we saw the coming together of the Black Panther Party, the Gay Liberation Front, and the Women's Liberation Front. Just like the sexual liberation movements that emerged after Stonewall and later struggles for broad access to medication and research and the fight for universal health care to fight AIDS, our movement needs to be anti-racist, politically independent, and represent the broad interests of working people, because those are our community. And if we are to win our struggle in Ferguson and our wider struggle for social justice, we need to link up with this new Black freedom movement that's developed here. And I think that demands an end to discrimination based on sexual orientation, gender identity, a $15 an hour minimum wage, fully funded schools, full legalization, marriage equality, and end to mass incarceration are basically some demands that we as a community, as the LGBT community, should be pushing for. Thank you guys.
Can you tell it takes a lot to pull it out of him?
Sorry. Really just excited.
All right. How's everybody doing? Good. All right. I feel like you should have gone last and just said, type shit. That would be way more common. But firstly, we can talk about why I'm here, right? So my name is Ashley Yates, Brown Blaze on social media. And on August 9th, I just went out to see what was going on, because the narratives that were getting spun were of two entirely different sides. There was one narrative where I could not scroll through my Twitter feed without seeing something about Michael Brown. And there was the other narrative of nothing has happened. Even in local media, nothing has happened. So I went down just to kind of see what was happening. And as anyone who knows, or who was down there in the initial days knows, there was just something not right in the air. There was no response from the government. There was no response from the police department. There was no acknowledgement that anything ever happened. So once again, you have these two different narratives of people on the ground that are hurt and pain, screaming out for someone to hear them, and then you have the people that are supposed to be responding being absolutely silent. So as it went on, and we got into the days of the rubber bullets and the tear gas, and we started to realize that this was going to take a lot of work, right? To get some real acknowledgement, to get some real responsibility to occur, to get some real accountability to occur. So we stayed with it, right? We're still with it. People started founding organizations. We founded ours, Millennial Activists United, just as young persons of color, millennials who were down on the ground, who didn't quite know the avenues to take to seek the change we wanted to see, but didn't see them being taken in any other organizations. We didn't see the people being receptive to the type of change that we know needs to occur. So being on the front lines, you notice something, and that is that the majority of the people down there are women. The majority of the people. Thank you. I think it's real. You start looking around and you wonder why that is. So you start to analyze it. And then as you're analyzing, you're looking at the way in which people are moving. And you're noticing that there are men down there, and some of them are, pulling women aside and saying, no, let me be on the front line. Right? And then there are others who are taking, the middle of the ground approach, which is if there's, some danger that occurs, we're going to stand in solidarity and we're all going to take it together. And then you have the ones who just act as though the women are not out there in any regard. Three very different approaches, right? Same thing happens once you're off of the front lines. You have those same men who, when they're trying to move forward with change, don't acknowledge that you're even there. You have the ones that go, that's a great point. Let me appropriate it, right? Let me push you out of the way. And then you have the ones that, are kind of like, oh, we'll let you sit at the table, but we're not really going to listen to anything you have to say. So as we started to really do this work, and my organization, the people that are on the ground are 3 women and 1 guy. So as we started to move forward in doing this work, we noticed we gained a profile as a women's organization, right? Knowing that we have a man who works alongside us, we had to kind of explore that dynamic for ourselves and see why that was happening, and what that meant, right? What that meant to be a women's organization that wants to represent men and also has a man, in their exec board or however you want to put it. And we realized, I guess, the highlight of the intersectionality of it, right? That just because you're a women's organization and you have women's needs, just because you're a feminist and you have, feminist agenda or however you want to put it, doesn't mean that you're not inclusive of other people. It just means that you see the need for this unique space to be asserted and affirmed, right? So that's just kind of some background on me and the work that we're doing. We recognize that need and we're reaching out, and it doesn't stop at women, right? It's inclusive to, and I use the queer community. That's just my term. I actually had someone ask me on Twitter the other day, when Black people took that word back, I didn't know we gave it up. So that's the term that we use, right? And yeah, it's difficult. As we started to do the work and we saw that we had kind of been carved out in a space for women, we also realized that we're inclusive of queer people, self-included, right? And that we were also the only organization who had queer people sitting at the table. So now what does that mean, right? How do we bring our needs as an organization that's been lifted up with majority women, as a Black organization that's working within a Black liberation movement, and also as queer people sitting at the table? How do we address all those needs, give them equal time, and not, get into stratification, which is something that I've had an issue with probably since college. I've never identified as a feminist. My introduction to feminism was probably the same as a lot of other women of color, white feminism, right? That was something I didn't fit into, clearly. Right? So then, as I went to college, I was reintroduced to another paradigm or theory of Africana womanism. I don't know, is anyone familiar with that? I went to Mizzou, so. Hey, Tigress. Mizzou, where's Mizzou? I just want to read it. Yeah, all right, that's love. But I was introduced to that theory, which the short of it is you address the needs that people see first. And there's actually, if you get into the theory and you look at, her writings and everything, there's actually a section in which she says, from 100 feet away, everyone can tell you're Black. Everyone can't tell you're a woman. From 50 feet away, they can kind of start to see, right, that you're a woman. And then as you get closer, maybe from 5 feet away, then they can start to see the class. And that's the order in which we need to address these things, right? Which, for me personally, at first it seemed to fit. I wasn't out yet, hadn't even talked about that side of myself, right? Hadn't even began to explore that side of myself. So I knew that I was Black, and I knew that that was a huge issue. So that seems right, and I know that racism is very real, and it exists. So that seems right to address first, right? I'm also from a middle-class background, and present in a certain way, right? So my gender, my sex makes sense to come second. And then being from a middle-class background, poverty was never a huge thing for me. Class was never a huge thing for me. I didn't grow up around people who made it clear that that's a real need that needs to be addressed. I grew up in a two-parent middle-class home with, ethnic diversity. So that theory made sense to me. And then as I got into the real world, I realized just how wrong that is, and that we should not have to section ourselves off in order to gain our freedom, right? So part of what I want to bring to the conversation, and I don't know if I'm able to make a conversation and open it up yet, but I definitely want to bring, yes, all right, thank you for that. I definitely want to bring to the table, how do we make sure that when we're doing this work, we highlight our intersectionality and we bring our full selves to the table. So we're not sitting in spaces like this as a Black queer person, and then I'm not sitting in Black liberation tables as a Black person who happens to be queer, right? But how do we meld those things and really do the work of community and the work for basic human rights? And I think that's where it starts, is we address basic human rights. My partner, fiance, however you want to put it, I call her my girlfriend, but we're beyond that. But my girlfriend, we're an interracial couple. And something she had in her heart from the beginning that hurt her was that she did not see the LGBT community come out in numbers surrounding the death of Michael Brown. And she couldn't understand why that was. Because at its core, this is an 18-year-old child that was shot over 10 times